Wyoming Territory, 1878. The wind carried dust and judgment across the dry plains as Hazel Boone stood on her family's porch, her fists clenched in the folds of her faded calico dress. "I do not love him," she said, loud enough for her father to hear. "You will do as you were told," her father snapped, his voice hard as the land he farmed. "By sundown, you'll be Mrs. Elijah Granger." Elijah was a stranger with too much money and not enough kindness. He had wandered into their lives 3 weeks ago with slick boots and a bottle of whiskey, offering to buy a piece of land and a wife along with it. Her father, worn down by years of drought and debt, had agreed without asking her. Hazel's mother had passed 2 winters ago, and her 2 younger brothers were buried on the hill behind the barn. That left her the last Boone child to be bargained off like livestock. Hazel ran. She did not grab boots or food. She just ran, bare feet pounding the dry dirt, braid flying behind her. She only made it as far as the edge of the woods before a firm hand caught her arm. "Stop," he said. "You'll break your ankles out here." Hazel turned, breathless, ready to fight. But the man holding her arm was not Elijah. He was younger, leaner, with a worn blue cavalry coat and sharp, quiet eyes the color of storm clouds. He released her as soon as she pulled. "Who are you?" she asked. He glanced back toward the house. "I was riding west. Saw some trouble. Figured I'd check." Hazel looked him over. His coat was patched and his boots were dusty. A long rifle rested across his back. He had the look of someone who knew how to live alone. "I do not need help," she said, even though her voice cracked. He raised his hands. "All right. But I am not letting a girl run barefoot into a prairie full of snakes and bones. I am not a girl. I am 21. The man gave a small nod. "Still not safe." Hazel reined in her breath. "What is your name?" "Malden James," he said. "Used to scout for the army. Ride alone now." Hazel looked away. She could hear Elijah's voice back at the house, shouting at her father. She didn't have much time. "I am being forced to marry a man I do not know," she said plainly. "He has a mean streak and a fast temper. My father owes him." Malden looked at her for a long moment, jaw working. Then he looked back at the house. "I will get you out," he said. "But not like this. Too many eyes. I am not going back in there." "You will not have to," he said. "Wait here. I will come back for you tonight." Hazel narrowed her eyes. "Why would you do that?" Malden pulled a worn cord from his pocket, a small token carved from bone, plain but shaped like a feather. He offered it to her. "Scout's pledge," he said. "If I give this, I do not break my word." Hazel took it, her fingers brushing his. She did not believe in promises anymore. But something about the way Malden stood solid, quiet, like a tree that had weathered storms made her nod. He disappeared back into the trees. That night, the wind howled through the cracks in the Boone farmhouse. Elijah paced in the parlor, slamming his glass against the table. Hazel's father sat silent beside him. Hazel crept out the back, the carved feather pressed tight in her palm. Malden was waiting with 2 horses and a pack. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes." They rode fast and silent into the night, cutting across the plains with only the moon to guide them. Hazel did not look back. By dawn, they had crossed a ridge and dropped into a narrow valley near a stream. Malden led the horses to water, then handed her a blanket. "You can rest here," he said. Hazel sat, legs shaking. "Where are we going?" "There is a safe place 2 days west. I know a woman there. She helps people like you." Hazel leaned back against the rock. "You do this often?" "No," he said. She looked at him. "Then why me?" Malden looked at her, quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Because no one should be forced to marry a stranger." Hazel stared at him, heart pounding. "That is not a reason." "It is my reason." They traveled slow the next 2 days, skirting towns and riding through old paths only Malden seemed to know. He never pushed her to talk, but when she did, he listened. She told him about her mother's singing voice, about Caleb and Dean, her brothers who died of fever. She told him how she used to hide in the wheat fields and dream of a life that belonged to her. Malden told her little. But once as they made camp by an old cottonwood, he said, "I had a younger sister. She died in Kansas during the raids. I was not there." Hazel did not ask more. They reached the cabin on the third morning small, tucked into a grove of pine, smoke curling from the chimney. The woman inside was older, Cherokee with strong arms and sharp eyes. Her name was Ada, and when she saw Malden, she pulled him into a hug so hard it made Hazel smile. "She can stay here," Ada said. "I will keep her safe." Malden turned to go. Hazel stood. "You are leaving? I only promised to get you safe." She stepped forward. "You could stay." Malden looked at her, and for the first time his voice was unsure. "I do not belong here." Hazel crossed the distance between them. She took his hand and placed the feather back in his palm. "You said you do not break your word," she said. "Then stay. Just one day." Malden stayed. One day turned into 2. Then a week. Hazel helped Ada with the garden and Malden fixed the roof. When Hazel left, Malden's eyes always found her first. One night, as the stars burned low over the trees, Hazel stepped out to find him sitting on the porch. "You came back for me," she said. He looked up. "I gave you a pledge." "No," she said. "You cared. That is why." Malden stood slowly. Hazel looked up at him, her heart racing but sure. "I am not afraid anymore," she said. "Not with you." Malden touched her face, slow and careful, like he thought she might still run. "I will never force you," he said. Hazel leaned in, resting her forehead to his. "You do not have to," she whispered. He kissed her then soft, steady, like a vow. And this time she kissed him back. The snow came early that year, thin flurries clinging to the dark soil around Ada's cabin, the scent of wood smoke thick in the air. Hazel stood by the split rail fence, brushing hay from her hands, watching Malden as he tested the new hinges on the barn door. The cold had brought a hush over the valley, the kind that made every sound sharper, the creak of leather, the low grunt of the mule, the distant knock of a woodpecker in the pines. "You've been up since before dawn," she said, stepping closer. "You'll wear yourself out before the snow deepens." The door was sagging, Malden replied, not looking up. "Couldn't leave it like that." Hazel leaned her arms on the fence rail. "Ada says the roof's next. You planning to rebuild the whole place? If it needs it." She watched him for a moment, the way his shoulders moved steady and sure with each swing of the hammer. "You won't say it," she said, "but you've made yourself part of this place." Malden set the hammer down and finally turned to her. "I don't settle easy. You're settled now, whether you meant to be or not." He didn't argue. Instead, he stepped away from the barn and came to stand beside her. His coat was frayed at the cuffs, and she noticed a new tear near his collarbone. "Did you ever think about going back east?" she asked. "Before you headed out this far?" "I did once," he said. "After the war. Thought maybe I could find what was left of home. But everything that mattered was already gone." Hazel nodded slowly. "I used to think about running to Cheyenne. Thought maybe they'd need a laundress or a cook. I never made it past the creek." "You made it farther than that now." She glanced over at him. "You don't ask questions you don't want answers to, do you?" "Not unless I'm ready to hear them." Hazel hesitated, then said, "I wasn't just running from a marriage. I was running from the weight of it all. The way my father looked at me, like I was just more trouble to shoulder. Like I was something to trade off and forget." Malden didn't flinch. He reached into the inside of his coat and pulled out a small pouch worn smooth from use. He opened it, revealing a thin strip of cloth, faded blue with tiny white flowers. "My sister made this," he said. "Kept it tied to her braid. I found it near the barn after the raid. I don't carry much, but I carry this." Hazel reached out slowly, her fingers brushing the fabric. "You still mourn her." "I reckon I always will." They stood silent for a while, the wind picking up and rattling the bare branches overhead. Then Hazel said, "I never learned how to shoot. My brothers were too young, and my father didn't see the sense." Malden's brow lifted. "You want to learn?" "I want to stop being afraid of what I can't do." He nodded once. "We'll start tomorrow. I've got an extra rifle, lighter stock." Hazel looked back at the cabin, smoke curling from the chimney, the low murmur of Ada's voice inside as she sang to herself while preparing supper. "I didn't expect this," she said. "Not any of it. I thought I'd be alone or worse." "You're not alone." He didn't say more, and she didn't press him. Instead, she reached for his hand, rough and scarred but warm in hers. He let her hold it. That night, Hazel sat beside Ada by the hearth, peeling root vegetables while the older woman stitched a tear in her shawl. "You've got more color in your cheeks than you did when you arrived," Ada said, her eyes not leaving the thread. "I think I've started breathing again." Ada gave a quiet hum. "That man of yours. He's got the look of someone who's walked far to find peace." Hazel set the potato down. "I don't know if he's found it. Maybe he hasn't. But I know the look of someone who's stopped running." Hazel sat with that a moment. Then she said, "He's teaching me to shoot tomorrow." Ada smiled, just barely. "Good. The world won't always be kind." "I know." Later, as the fire burned low and the wind howled against the shutters, Hazel stepped outside. Malden was sitting on the porch, whetstone in hand, sharpening his knife in slow, deliberate strokes. "Do you ever wonder what comes after peace?" she asked. He looked up, his fingers pausing. "I haven't thought that far." "I think I have," Hazel said. "And I think I want you there with me when I find it." Malden didn't speak, but he set the knife aside and stood. She closed the distance between them. "I trust you," she said. "That's not something I ever thought I'd say again." He reached up and brushed a loose strand of hair from her temple, his touch careful. "Then I'll stay as long as you ask." "I'm not asking," she said. "I'm telling you. I want you to stay." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and cold earth. He leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers. "Then I'm home," he said quietly. Hazel closed her eyes, letting the warmth of him settle through her like the last light of day. She didn't need to run anymore. And he'd already stopped. By late January, the creek behind Ada's cabin had frozen over in a thin sheet of dull white. Malden stood at the edge of the tree line, watching Hazel sight down the barrel of the rifle. Her breath fogged the cold air, and her stance was stiff with focus. "You're holding too tight," he said. "You don't need to wrestle it." Hazel adjusted her grip, jaw tight. "You said to keep my elbow up, not locked." He stepped behind her, not close, just near enough that she could hear the even cadence of his words. "Breathe in steady. Let it out slow." She did, and the shot rang sharp through the trees. The can she was aiming at jolted, then tumbled from the stump. Hazel lowered the rifle and looked back at him. "That count." He walked past her to check. "Clipped it. You'll do better next round." She followed, brushing stray straw from her coat. "I don't care if I miss. I just want to know I can try." "You're not missing," he said. "You're learning." She squinted at him. "That your way of saying I'm stubborn?" Malden's mouth twitched the closest he came to amusement. "I've seen men fold easier than you." They gathered the cans and started back toward the cabin. The snow had hardened underfoot, crunching with each step. Hazel carried the rifle over her shoulder now, more natural than she had the day before. "Did you ever think about staying with the army?" she asked. "No," he said without hesitation. "Once the war ended, I was no use to them." "You were a scout. That seems useful." "Not to men who want order. Scouts don't fit in barracks." Hazel looked at him sideways. "You don't regret leaving?" He took a moment before answering. "I regret what I saw, not that I left it behind." They reached the porch. Ada was inside, kneading dough with her elbow propped to ease the ache in her shoulder. Hazel stepped in and peeled off her gloves, her fingers red from the cold. "You've done real shooting now," Ada said, not looking up. "You'll want to keep your hands warm or they'll stiffen." Hazel moved to the stove and held her palms toward the heat. "Malden says I've got a steady aim." Ada glanced up then. "He don't give praise easy." If he said that, he meant it. Malden remained outside, brushing snow from the saddle blankets. Hazel watched him through the window, the way he moved with quiet attentiveness, like someone who'd learned to listen to the world instead of speaking over it. That evening, after supper, Hazel stepped outside with a lantern. The wind had died down and the stars were sharp-edged above the trees. She found Malden at the stump by the barn, carving a piece of pine into something she couldn't yet make out. She crouched nearby, setting the lantern on a flat stone. "You always work with your hands when you don't want to sleep?" He didn't look up. "Can't sleep easy when I've been still too long." She picked up a shaving of wood and turned it between her fingers. "What are you carving?" He held it out. The shape was rough still, but she could see the curve of wings. "A bird in flight. I didn't know you did things like this." "I don't show it much." Hazel turned the carving in her hand. "It's lovely." Malden shrugged. "It's something to do." She looked at him in the lantern glow, his face carved in shadow and firelight. There was a quiet there that didn't feel empty. "Have you ever built a place of your own?" she asked. "No, would you?" He glanced up at her, his expression unreadable. "I would if I had reason." She stood slowly. "I think we could build something here, not just a roof. Something that belongs to both of us." Malden rose too, the unfinished carving still in his hand. "You sure?" "I don't speak when I'm not." He nodded once. "Then I'll stay." Hazel stepped closer. "Not just stay. Build with me." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers brushing the inside of her wrist. "Then we'll start tomorrow." She leaned into him, and he wrapped his coat around her shoulders, holding her there beneath the wide, cold sky. The wind didn't matter. The silence didn't either. They were no longer running. They were beginning. By late February, the snow turned crusted and brittle, breaking underfoot like old glass. Hazel stood at the edge of the clearing behind the cabin, a coil of rope slung over her shoulder, her cheeks ruddy from the wind. She watched Malden dig post holes along the far fence line, his coat dark with sweat despite the cold. "You dig like you're trying to reach Texas," she said, stepping closer. He looked up, pausing to rub the back of his neck. "Soil's shallow here. Roots run wide." Hazel set the rope down and crouched beside the rails they'd laid earlier that week. "Ada says the ground's best along the southern edge. Could plant beans come spring." Malden nodded but didn't speak. He drove the spade back into the earth, slower this time. "Did you farm before?" Hazel asked. "No," he said. "Didn't stay in one place long enough." "You learning to?" Malden glanced at her. "I think I'm learning a lot these days." Hazel pulled a small tin from her coat and handed it over. "You forgot to eat again." He took the biscuit without protest. "You always watching me? Only when you forget you've got a body to look after." He broke the biscuit in half and gave the larger piece to her. Hazel took it, quiet for a moment, then said, "I had a friend once, before the bad years came. We talk about what we'd grow if we had our own place. She used to say peas. I always said corn." Malden chewed slowly. "What happened to her?" "She married a freighter. Got sick on the trail to Utah. Never made it past Laramie." The wind shifted, stirring the low branches of the pine. Hazel stood, brushing crumbs from her gloves. "I want this fence done before the thaw," she said. "So if we have to mend it come summer, we know where the weak spots are." "You sound like someone who's planning to stay." "I am," she said. "I just hadn't said it out loud yet." Malden leaned against the shovel, eyes steady on her. "What made you decide?" Hazel walked to the next post hole and knelt beside it. "Because I'm not afraid here. Not of the land. Not of the work. Not of you." He didn't answer, but his silence had weight to it. Not the kind that closed a door, just the kind that held a promise. That evening, Ada sat near the fire with a tin of dried lavender in her lap, sorting the brittle stems with slow fingers. Hazel poured water into the iron kettle and glanced toward the window, where dusk was settling its blue shadow across the trees. "Malden's carving again," she said. Ada looked up. "He's steady with his hands. Weren't always like that." "You knew him before the war?" Ada nodded once. "He passed through here once long ago. Didn't speak much then either, but he was quick to help." Hazel folded the dishcloth over the bread pan. He told me he doesn't belong anywhere. Ada smiled faintly. That's a thing men tell themselves when they've been made to feel they don't deserve peace. Hazel sat down across from her. He's building this place with me, piece by piece. Then he's already claimed it, whether he knows it or not. Outside, the first stars blinked into the sky. Hazel stepped out into the cold and found Malden by the woodpile, the carving in his lap nearly finished. This one wasn't a bird, it was a stalk of corn. The leaves curled back from the grain. She sat beside him without a word. I didn't know what to make of you that first night, he said, not looking up. Hazel leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. And now, I don't wonder anymore. She turned toward him, the light from the cabin flickering over his face. You ever think about what comes after this fence is done? After the planting? After next winter? I think about what it'd be like to build a roof with more than just walls under it. A roof with a name. Hazel's breath caught just slightly. You mean a home. I mean a life. She reached out, took the carving from his hands, and turned it over in hers. It was careful, detailed, the grain of the wood running through each kernel. Nothing rushed. Nothing wasted. I want that too, she said. Malden took her hand and held it between both of his, rough palms warming her fingers. Then we'll build it together. Not for running. Not for hiding. Just for staying. Hazel leaned against his shoulder, the cold forgotten. Behind them, the light inside the cabin glowed soft and steady. The land might freeze again, the winds might return, but the fence would hold. So would they. The thaw came slow, turning the hard-packed snow into thick mud that clung to boots and wagon wheels. Hazel stood barefoot on the porch, sleeves rolled to the elbow, rubbing the last of the lard into a pan. Chickens scratched at the softening earth near the fence line, and the air carried the scent of wet pine and thawed moss. Malden returned from the ridge with a small bundle of saplings tied over his shoulder and mud-streaked to his knees. Hazel watched him cross the yard, the way his steps had eased since the first days, how they no longer carried the weight of leaving. You're tracking half the forest behind you, she said, stepping down to meet him. He looked at his boots. Ground gave out near the old trail. I near went in up to my waist. Hazel took the bundle from him, testing the weight. These for the north edge? Poplars. Fast growing. They'll take to the slope if we plant them right. She nodded and turned toward the shed, and he followed. Inside, the air held the scent of sawdust and oil. Hazel set the saplings down beside the wall and reached for the hand hoe. Malden paused by the window, looking out toward the clearing. Ryder came by while you were gone, she said. He faced her, brows low. Just a fur trapper, she added. Wanted to trade pelts for flour. I sent him toward Ada's. Told him we had none to spare. You feel safe enough to do that now? I do. Malden stepped closer, brushing a bit of bark from her shoulder. You didn't before. I didn't know what safe felt like. She paused, then said, I've started writing things down. Just little notes. What we plant. What we mend. What we build. He looked at her with quiet interest. Why? I want to remember we did it with our own hands. Not because someone gave it to us. So when winter comes again, we'll know we've done it once already. Malden took a breath slow. I never had a place worth remembering. You do now. That night, Hazel lit a stub of beeswax and brought out the ledger she'd stitched from old flour sacks and ribbon. Malden sat nearby, whittling a small length of ash wood into a spoon. The silence between them had shifted over the weeks, not absence, but understanding. I want to ask something, Hazel said, not looking up from her page. Malden set the knife down. Go on. If I were to send word east to the land office in Rawlins and file for this homestead as ours in both names, yes, he said. She looked up. You don't need to finish, he said. Whatever you're building, I want my name beside yours. Hazel folded her hands over the page, her heart steady. Then we'll ride together come spring and sign it. Malden stood and crossed to her, took her hand and pressed it to his chest. I've carried too many names that meant nothing. But I'll carry this one. Yours. She rose and leaned into him, and when he kissed her, she felt no trace of the man who had once stood apart from the world. Only the one who had grown roots beside her. By early May, the poplars had taken hold, their first green leaves twitching in the breeze. Hazel's garden rose had sprouted, careful seedlings pushing through the soil she turned by hand. A new gate hung on the south fence, and Malden had built a bench beneath the cottonwood where they often sat in the evenings, watching the last light drift across the ridge. Ada arrived one afternoon with a basket of dried herbs and a long piece of cotton dyed in warm earth tones. "Made this for you," she said, handing it to Hazel. "For the wedding you never had." Hazel unfolded the fabric, fingers brushing the seams. "You knew. I knew the moment you started baking bread again." They married beneath the cottonwood the next day, just the three of them and the wind carrying the new season over the hills. Hazel wore her mother's brooch pinned to her collar. Malden had shaved close and combed back his hair. Ada spoke the words with quiet certainty, and when they kissed, Hazel tasted the promise of everything they'd planted. That summer, the earth gave back more than either had expected: beans, squash, and hearty rows of barley. Malden repaired the shed roof before the rains came, and Hazel sold extra preserves to trappers passing along the old trail. They slept with the windows open, wrapped in each other, and woke with the sun touching their joined hands. By autumn, the cabin stood solid, the fence held, and the trees they planted had doubled in height. Hazel's ledger sat thick with pages, dates, weather, what grew and what failed. On the last page, she wrote, "This is the year we chose love over fear. This is the year we stayed." And when the snow came again, gentle this time, Malden built a fire while Hazel stirred stew on the stove. He came to her side, slid his arm around her waist, and kissed her temple. "Next year," he said, "we'll add a root cellar. Maybe even another room." Hazel leaned into him. "As long as we build it together." They stood in the warmth they'd made, the wind shut out, the fire steady, the years ahead stretching wide and open. The land would freeze and thaw again, and they would meet it side by side, hands calloused, hearts sure, a life built slow and strong beneath the cottonwoods.